everyone. Welcome to another episode with the Crime and Coffee Couple. My name's Allison.
And my name's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Al. How are you, baby?
I'm doing so good. How are you?
Good. You got those nice rosy cheeks?
I do. I put some bronzer on this morning.
Did you? Okay.
I did. And I'm wearing my new t-shirt that my mom got me as an early Christmas present.
Oh, if you're on YouTube, you can see it. It's got skulls and it's got fire coming out of it.
And despite that, it says, everything's fine.
That's kind of how you live your life. You want to make it look...
Everything's fine. Nothing to see here.
Yeah. And you talked about bronzer. We were in the mall with our daughter the other day, and she was talking about our son's hair. He's got one of those broccoli heads that the teenagers are doing these days.
Oh, yeah.
He's trying to put his hair just like straight up. He's like 16, so right into that whole phase. And she was like, yeah, Dad, it's he's kind of like hair blind. Like, he doesn't know how high it is. It's kind of like when you get like, what is it? When you're
she says blush blind.
Blush blind. And I was like, she's like, like blush blind. And I'm like, why would you think I would know what blush blind means? And she's like, no, when you put on more and more blush and you don't really know, and then like you come out and you have like really red cheeks. I'm like, yeah, I have no idea what that is.
You don't know anything about blush blind?
Well, now I do, thanks to our daughter.
Yes, exactly. You'll learn a lot from teenagers. That is for sure.
Yeah. And we wanted to tell you guys all about our New York trip. We just got back recently. And even though this is an episode in mid-December, we got back at the end of November.
Yes, right before Thanksgiving. It's just we're busting out chunks of episodes so that we're ready for the holidays and travel and going to Chicago, and
we get what you guys need and we get out what we want to get out and everything. Yeah, all that
doing
stuff.
The best that we can.
I said it a million times. If you like our episodes, like, you're gonna love everything we do, because Allison makes sure that everything's hit because she's crazy.
Because she's a psycho.
She's crazy. And real quick, if you love what we do, and it's the holidays, you're giving, everybody's asking for money, and we're gonna join that. So come on over and become a patron or an Apple subscriber. You could become a free Apple subscriber just to try us out. There's like, I think, 80 plus bonus episodes?
I would say upwards of 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
100 plus between the espressodes where we don't talk at all in the beginning. We've got like a bunch of bonus episodes. So like every single week we're coming out with either a bonus episode or an espressode.
For a month. Yeah. For a bonus a month. So. And even my coworker, she was saying that she's going to ask for that as a gift for the year.
What a sweetheart.
I know. And I said, thank you so much. That is so sweet.
Yeah, very nice. So how was New York? Did you enjoy yourself?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. And if you have not been to New York, I highly, highly suggest that you go. I have been there once before. It was actually 3 years ago, right at the exact same time, right before Thanksgiving. And at that point in time, the leaves in Central Park are spectacular. Central Park is absolutely glorious.
It's a dream. Everything you see on TV, it's like accurate. Like, it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. It's like an oasis in the middle of one of the best cities in the world.
It's incredible. Like, you do not feel like you are in a bustling city when you're in the center of Central Park. It's quiet. It's peaceful. There's squirrels. There's dogs wearing sweaters every which way.
You heard her. There's squirrels.
There's lots of squirrels. There's ducks. There's ducks that dive underwater and swim.
There's people eating bagels.
Lots of bagels, and that was one of us.
Eating pastrami. You got Jerry Seinfeld looking down on you from his penthouse.
I was like, hey, Jer, how you doing up there?
Yep, there's famous people all over the place. Like, it's just, we're originally from, most of you guys know, we're originally from the Chicagoland area. We're Chicago suburbs, so we always love Chicago. Still do. But like, New York is like having 10 Chicagos together. It's just like we walked and walked and walked. Like,
we did about 85,000 steps from Friday to Monday.
Yep.
About 25 on average, 25,000 each day, 11 and a half miles. I was wearing these thick Doc Martens that were like lead weights on my feet. And just traipsing around that city, it was just so much fun.
Towards the end of the first night, she was like, these feel very heavy. And I looked down, I could see why. I mean, the thickness of the rubber is like,
so
4
heavy.
inches. Yeah.
And we went to Brooklyn. We walked the Brooklyn Bridge. Brooklyn, oh my gosh, it is so freaking quaint and cute. We went into these adorable bakeries, got our rainbow cookies.
It felt like walking into the 1950s. Like, it kind of smelled like the 1950s. And then the lady behind the counter is like, all right, so what you need and whatever.
We think she was drinking wine out of a mug.
Yeah, I think she was sneaking some wines. That's her thing.
It was a Sunday. She could have her wine.
Sure. And we just wanted to. We're like, we just want to sample some cookies, and they're like, what, like a couple pounds? I'm like, sure. I don't know how you sell them.
We're like, we want to bring them back to our family in Florida for Thanksgiving, so we did, and everyone enjoyed the hell out of them. We ate our last 2 cookies this morning
between podcasts.
But it was funny because you're walking around a city. There's not bathrooms aplenty in the city,
which is a huge problem for Allison?
Huge, because I'm drinking lattes like they're going out of style, and I'm trying to hydrate on water.
Yeah.
So we're traipsing through Brooklyn, and I had to pee yet again. And I'm like, where does one find a bathroom
We're
over
just
here?
like looking for a restaurant or something, or somewhere where we can pop in.
And so Mike pulls out his phone and he goes, hey, Google, where does one urinate in Brooklyn? So I start laughing so hard. I'm like, I'm gonna pee.
So we had to stop in to get a coffee.
We got to get another coffee later than what I would have normally liked to drink it. But when you got to pee, you got to pee.
Yeah. And I suppose we could have bought a water or something. But yeah, when you're at a coffee shop, you're in Brooklyn, you got to buy a latte.
So good. But then we went and saw Water for Elephants on Broadway. Oh my gosh, we just had the best time. New York, fabulous. Highly recommend. Go if you haven't.
Yeah.
If you can.
Even if you're like, you've been to cities before, you're like, whatever, it's a city. Like there's just everything everywhere. Like there's people everywhere all the time. It's not, and we don't love crowds. So there wasn't like huge crowds.
No.
There were a couple places like Fifth
Couple
Avenue.
of spots. Oh, Times Square. Oof.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, it's definitely somewhere to go. You got to see it
You
if
have
you're
to go.
there.
Yeah.
It is not my cup of tea. There's like these janky characters that walk around dressed as like Elmo and Mickey and Minnie, and
They
they're
target people.
Oh
and
my gosh,
it's so much smaller than you see like on television. Like
Yeah.
you get there and it's like, oh, this isn't that large. It's
and
funny.
they want to take pictures with you. So we're trying to look around Times Square and enjoy it. And we've got friggin' Minnie Mouse that looks distorted and demented walking up to take a picture with us. And I'm thinking to myself, why would she think we would want a picture? We live in Orlando, of course, or not Orlando, but we live near Orlando. She wouldn't know that. But do we look like two people who want to take a picture with Minnie Mouse?
What do those people look like, Allison?
Maybe have children with them?
Yeah, that's actually they did target kids. They're like, try to wave at them and try to get them to like say hi, hey. And like the gross thing is they don't even keep the masks on the whole time.
No,
they
they're popped up.
Yeah, and so you see their faces are like looking around. And it's like, poop, and then they pop it on, and then they run at the person that they want to
It's
get.
like, no, Minnie Mouse, no.
Stop right where you are. Yeah.
No, Elmo, I don't want a picture with you.
Yeah, we got our bagels, we got our pizza, we had a bunch of wonderful meals outside of that.
And it was just the two of us, so we were actually able to have an uninterrupted conversation. It was pretty damn nice.
Yep, did the High Line walk, which I didn't know was a
Chelsea.
thing. Yeah, which a lot of people
Lovely.
love Chelsea. It's like, and there's still like a million other things we could have done. So.
100%. Everyone's like, did you go here? Did you eat there? Did you do that? I'm like, we were only there from Friday to Monday.
No Empire State Building. We didn't do the 9/11 memorial because I don't want to see it. I don't want to be sad. So
I went with my girlfriends, and oh my gosh, talk about powerful. Like as soon as you walk up, you just start crying.
If we go with the kids, I would go. But
100%.
I would not look forward to it. Is it something that you would look forward to?
I mean, you got to go see it.
Do
I
ya?
think I do. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, we all live through it. At least the older ones. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't feel like it.
So-
I definitely feel sorry for everybody there. But it was the city itself. So much energy. Just I mean, everything. It's crazy. Like you can go anywhere. It's like you can't just type in best pizza in New York. It's
No.
like the best pizza in the Upper West Side. Like it's over the Upper East Side or Manhattan or the streets you're on. Because like within 5 streets, there's the best of something in that area.
Right. I always think of Elf. Congratulations, you did it. The world's best cup of coffee.
Yeah, they're just looking at them like, oh, that's just a sign.
But yeah, we had lots of good bagels and lots of good coffee.
You got yourself a Band-Aid.
Oh, yes. We're walking down the street. Of course, I've got these massive boots on my feet, which all in all were pretty comfortable. But I don't know why I said it, because obviously we live in America. We say Band-Aids. And I was like,
Or
I
bandages.
need to get a plaster for my toe. And you go, what is that, a cookie? No, I didn't say for my toe. I said, we have to go to Walgreens so I can get a plaster. And you go, what is that, a cookie?
Well, because she was talking about like these rainbow Italian cookies and some other things that her friends told her about. I'm like, it sounds like a cookie. It sounds like a pastry. Like a pastry? Plaster? I don't know.
I was like, no, it's what people in like the UK or Australia call a Band-Aid.
And I'm like, why the F are you calling
I
it a
just
plaster?
felt like saying it. I just don't know. It just got into me.
Sometimes her jokes fall real flat.
I thought it was funny, but that's just me.
But I tell people all the time, you don't know until you say it. And then, ma'am, the next time, maybe keep it to yourself. She thought she was being cute with her one little English phrases that she learns from
Why
her.
don't you keep your face to yourself?
I think actually I didn't during the trip. We had a good time. Man.
All right, why don't you just be quiet?
That is the best part about getting away from the kids. I'll tell you
Get
that.
out of here. Just seriously, get out of here.
Get out of here.
Get up and get out of here.
I couldn't talk about it without actually doing
All right,
that,
so we're going to get into this case because, as per usual, Mike likes to make things uncomfortable.
We definitely got into something.
All right, Mike likes to make things uncomfortable. We've established that. If you're a new listener, you're now learning that. If you're not a new listener, you already know that. Okay.
Willkommen in.
So on that note, we are getting into a sad case. So this is the murder of Michelle Martinko. So the days and the weeks that lead up to Christmas, they can clearly be magical. We're smack dab in the middle of that right now. It's a cozy time of year. Things settle down. Maybe activities aren't going on. Maybe your work schedule isn't quite as intense. Of course, if you're in retail, it's that much more intense.
Yep.
But it's time when you can settle in, you can watch a holiday movie, sip hot cocoa, while the glow from the Christmas tree is highlighting the room. But at the same time, within the magic, there's always a little chaos, a lot of hustle and bustle. It's involved with getting that one special gift for that family member who seems impossible to buy for. The extra baking, cooking, party hosting, and spending can truly lead into a tailspin of stress. So in this particular story, as an Iowa family was getting ready for the excitement of Christmas, they were left devastated and baffled by the murder of their 18-year-old daughter. The family went on an unrelenting quest to solve this case, and it was the victim herself who had been the one to help solve her own murder 4 decades later. So on Wednesday, December 19th, 1979, Mike and Allison were about 6 months old at this point. 18-year-old high school senior Michelle Martinko, she headed over to Westdale Mall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa?
Yeah.
Iowa. Why did I write Ohio? My apologies.
Oh, no. Cedar Rapids, probably Ohio.
Is it Ohio?
That's where the amusement park is, right?
Cedar Rapids, Ohio.
Yeah.
So just ignore me. I apologize. So we're in Cedar Rapids, Ohio. So she was going to the mall to pick up a coat. Her mom had placed the coat on layaway, and it was a gift for Michelle. So she went to the mall with $186 to pay it off. But ultimately, she decided while she was there that she didn't want the coat after all. She didn't take it with her. So on this day, she is, just going and doing a mundane, detailed thing, not detailed thing, a quick thing during the holiday season, and she disappears. So Michelle was born on October 6, 1961, to parents Albert and Janet. She was the youngest of 2 daughters. Janelle was her older sister by 12 years. The two were very close despite their large gap in age, because if you think about it, when she was born, her sister was 12. That's a big difference.
All right, it's Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I looked it up.
Iowa, that's what I thought.
Sorry to everybody out there.
My apologies. This is our 3rd episode in a row recording, so we might be a little brain dead, so I apologize. So we're in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So Michelle is 12 years younger than her sister, but they're close. She served as Janelle's flower girl when she married her husband, John Stonebreaker. The road to Michelle's birth was not an easy one for Janet. Janet actually suffered 5 miscarriages before she became pregnant with Michelle, and when she did, she was 44 years old.
Wow.
So the Martinko family viewed Michelle as their miracle baby, and Janelle was thrilled to be a big sister. At age 12, Michelle was diagnosed with scoliosis, and this is a curvature of the spine, and it resulted in Michelle having to wear a back brace that went from her neck to her hips. Like, this was extensive.
We heard a lot more about, a lot of,
Scoliosis?
Yes, scoliosis and pregnancies that didn't work back in like the 70s. Like, it
Yeah.
happened a lot. So it seems like we've got a little better control of that stuff.
Yeah,
now.
I
But
don't.
it was
I
very
truly
common.
don't know.
Very common back then.
But adolescence, can obviously be very challenging in itself. It's hard when you're at that age. You're in middle school or whatnot. You've got all your classmates around you. There's the popularity contests, and Michelle is now forced to wear this huge back brace that made her feel very different. It made her self-conscious at a time when a child really just wants to fit in.
Yeah, it sucks.
And on top of this, the brace made it very difficult for Michelle to easily move around, and it proved to be a challenging period of time. So at age 14, though, Michelle was finally able to remove her brace, and it was kind of symbolic because she was seeming to come into her own at this point in time, and everything seemed to shift into place. Suddenly, the gorgeous blonde-haired girl that had hair reminiscent of Farrah Fawcett, she began catching the eyes and attention of a lot of boys. And this was something that she was completely unaware of.
Probably not a lot of people hitting on her while she had her back brace on.
Right. So this was something she wasn't used to.
Or when she's 14.
So shortly after the brace came off, Michelle was at a roller rink with her friends when she caught the eye of 16-year-old Andy Seidel, and he was 1 year older. And the two went on to date for 2 years before they broke up because Michelle just wanted freedom in her life. She didn't want to have to answer to somebody, tell someone where she was going and when, that sort of thing. She just wasn't ready to be in a committed relationship. And according to her friend, though, Andy did not take the breakup very well. After she moved on from Andy, he continued to monitor her every move, or what seemed to be her every move. He wanted to know where she was, who she was dating. He was constantly going up to her friends for information as to her whereabouts, who she was seeing.
A little obsessive.
So Michelle's brother-in-law, John, felt that Andy just wouldn't go away. So in 1979, Michelle was a senior at Kennedy High School in Cedar Rapids, and here she excelled in her classes as well as her extracurricular activities. When she was a sophomore, she made the twirling or baton squad, and this was an amazing accomplishment. During halftime at football games, Michelle would be out on the field. She would be spinning her baton and performing alongside her fellow squad members. She also sang in Kennedy's women's choir as well as the concert choir. She was also part of the theater department, so she was very involved. After graduation in the spring, Michelle was planning on going off to Iowa State University in order to study interior design. So on the evening of Wednesday, December 19th, 1979, Michelle was downtown. She was at the Sheridan Hotel for a choir banquet. And when the banquet came to an end, this is when she was going to head over to the newly opened Westdale Mall on the southwest side of Cedar Rapids. And before she did head over, she did ask a friend, this is a fellow twirler, Jane Henson, if she wanted to come with her and tag along. Jane said that she had to really focus on her homework assignments and told her that she could not go. So after she learned that something terrible had happened to Michelle, Jane was in disbelief, and she placed a lot of guilt on herself that maybe with safety in numbers, her friend would still be alive today, but we can never, have that sort of 2020 hindsight vision.
Yeah.
So some people that knew Michelle bumped into her while she was out at the mall. No one recalls seeing her, though, after 9 p.m. That's kind of like the end point of when she was seen. And at this point in time, she was seen standing outside a jewelry store. And her friend and fellow choir member, this is Tracy Price, ran into Michelle. She saw that her friend was actually holding the $186 for the coat that she had actually gone to buy but didn't. And Tracy was basically saying don't be flashing your cash around, that puts a target on you.
Yeah, when she saw her holding it, it's that was a lot of money.
I know, but teenagers. So, it's Christmas time and people are oftentimes strapped for cash. So Tracy worried about her friend's safety and, basically told her to put the money away. And as they were chatting, she also found out that Michelle seemed a little anxious. She had been nervous about going to the mall by herself. And during their conversation, Michelle even had made the comment that she felt like she was being followed. But that was kind of the end of it. So now 2 a.m. is rolling around and Michelle's parents probably woke up and they realized that their daughter wasn't home. So obviously they were exceptionally concerned and they immediately contacted the police to, go out and search for Michelle. So at about 4 a.m. on Thursday morning, because her parents were fully aware that she was going to the Westdale Mall to get this coat, that's where investigators started. So they went to the parking lot and they saw the Martinko's family car. This was a 1972 tan Buick. It was parked on the northeast corner of the mall near JCPenney. So we know at 4 a.m. the mall is completely deserted and you just see this lone car sitting there. And that's just an eerie sight because we know she did not come home that night. So obviously the officers are approaching the car. And they were horrified when they found Michelle's body in the front seat of the car. So she was covered in blood. She had been stabbed and cut about 29 times. Rubber glove impressions were located on the outside of the car, in the dirt, and inside the car in the blood. Because the killer wore gloves, they were not able to detect any fingerprints from this person. There was no blood on the outside of the car and the pavement nearby, and to investigators, the attack seemed exceptionally personal and very much rage-filled. Like, they would have made the assumption that this is somebody that had something against Michelle, somebody that she knew.
Like, hated her almost.
Right. So Michelle wore a black spaghetti strap dress to the choir banquet that night. And in order to keep warm, she had worn a rabbit fur coat over it. Because, of course, we're in Iowa. It's cold.
Rabbit fur.
Yeah. Back in the 1970s, everybody had fur.
Really?
So investigators found bloody rabbit hair strewn around the car. Michelle was lying on her back. She was slumped over the passenger seat. She was leaning against the door of the Buick. She had parked her car a distance from the mall entrance, and it's likely that as she climbed into the car to head home, she started it. Again, it's cold, so she was probably letting it warm, get the frost off the window that had accumulated. And it's theorized that before she managed to put the car in drive and pull away, she was likely taken by surprise when someone yanked her car door open, pushed her over, and climbed into the car with her, and then attacked and killed her. And of course, this is 1979. Cars don't have an automatic locking feature for safety.
Yeah.
So Charles Jelinek was the captain of the CRPD at the time. He had been one of the first responding officers to the scene that night, or I should say early morning. So he was tasked with breaking the horrific news to Michelle's family. And Janelle later said that nothing could have ever prepared them for the devastating news that they received on the morning after her sister's murder. She recalls that her dad tried to be very stoic and strong to keep the family together. He was very angry that somebody would have ever hurt his little girl. Meanwhile, Janet was absolutely broken. She was brokenhearted. She was grief-stricken. She was unable to comprehend that her daughter was gone. And not only that, but she was gone in a horrifically violent way.
Yeah.
And Detective Harvey Dellinger was brought in to the scene. He recalls that in his career, he had never seen anyone stabbed that many times before. It was a case that was unheard of in the area of Cedar Rapids. In the small city of 110,000, they were stunned by the murder. They were scared. This was a mall that newly opened, and people were excited to go to it. This was a random day that this teenage girl, walked to her car at Christmas time and was savagely murdered.
Probably not a horrible area, I would guess.
No,
a brand new mall.
Not at all. So the medical examiner determined that Michelle had died sometime between 8 and 10 p.m., and we know that she was last seen at around 9 p.m. So that was that Wednesday night. And the exact murder weapon has never been recovered. It was not able to be determined like, oh, it belonged to this sort of knife, etc. But the medical examiner knew that it was a sharp-pointed object, possibly a knife. All of the stabbings, were directed to Michelle's upper body, to her face, her neck, her chest.
Like face? Like
yes,
who stabs in the face?
It was vicious and violent. Her hands were covered in defensive wounds. It was clear that she tried in vain to fight off her attacker.
Poor kid.
There was no robbery. Michelle had not been sexually assaulted. The money that she had taken to the mall to buy that coat was still there. She also had a bag of items that she'd purchased, untouched, in the back seat. There was no known motive as to why whoever did this to her did what they did. So detectives were left to grapple with who killed Michelle and why. She was a kind, sweet, loving girl. Who would have ever had this sort of anger against her? It was clear that the killer had approached the car, and they were prepared when they approached the car. They knew what they were doing.
This was their intent.
They did not walk up to that car to have a conversation and then an argument started.
Right.
They walked up to that car with gloves on. So they had the forethought to bring the rubber gloves in order to conceal their identity. Because we know that there's acts of passion and murder where a fight erupts. That was not the case. So it's possible that the person had the intention of sexually assaulting Michelle, but maybe she fought her attacker off and prevented it from happening, since she did have extensive defensive wounds to her hands and arms. So detectives interviewed Michelle's classmates as well as employees of the Westdale Mall in hopes of establishing a solid timeline prior to her death. And like I said, one witness did recall seeing her at 9 p.m. in a shop, and they saw that she was leaving the store alone. Police learned that Michelle's ex, this is Andy, he had actually bumped into Michelle at the mall that very night. He was brought in for questioning because, of course, everyone's saying, oh, Andy held a flame for Michelle and wasn't willing to accept the breakup. So he told investigators that shortly after the mall closed, he was home. This is something that they spoke to his mom about. She confirmed this. However, obviously, police are aware of the fact that maybe his mom was just trying to protect her son.
Right.
And maybe it was a false alibi. So Mike Wyrick, he had also dated Michelle in high school, and he was shocked when he learned about her murder. Mike was also considered a suspect at one point, as obviously investigators are eliminating their suspects. So, Mike is 100 miles away. He's at college. And despite that fact, he remembers the moment when detectives were basically, I'm sure what he was thinking in his head, were trying to bully him during questioning to the fact that they laid out photos in front of him from the crime scene.
That sucks.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
And this is something that despite the passage of decades, he cannot get these images out of his mind.
Yeah.
He loved Michelle. So despite Andy's alibi, he did remain a suspect. His behavior during Michelle's funeral really only intensified suspicions against him. Onlookers were watching as he nearly climbed into Michelle's casket.
Whoa.
He was sobbing and embracing her body and asking others present, I have to know who she loved when she died. Did she love me or did she love Mike?
Oh my
Who
God.
did she love when she died?
What a psycho.
It basically sounded like a spectacle.
Wow.
So many people believed that it was absolutely Andy who had killed Michelle.
Looking at that at the funeral, you're like, yeah, that's the guy.
Many people believed this, and they really felt that it was just going to be a matter of time until
They're like,
he
put
was
us in
arrested.
the jury. This guy's guilty.
Yeah. So there were no other suspects whatsoever. However, after high school, Andy left Cedar Rapids. He joined the Navy, and eventually, and when I say eventually, we're talking many years.
Crazy.
He finally, once DNA testing had evolved and, gotten farther along, he did provide his DNA and he was not a match.
Really?
But again, we're talking decades had gone by.
Yeah.
And this guy had been looked at fully by so many people in his hometown that he was the killer.
Wow.
Andy was not the killer.
Whoa.
No. So in the meantime, he had been living within his community for 27 years, and people fully believed he was a vicious murderer.
Wow.
And he wasn't.
I still don't believe you. I don't know.
He's not.
Okay. Well, that's crazy.
So the community of Cedar Rapids went on in fear after Michelle's murder, knowing that her killer, he was still out there. Her fellow baton twirlers wondered if maybe a killer was sitting in the stands watching them perform. And teen girls, they were working in the area. They were closing up shop, oftentimes at night. They needed to head to their cars in the dark. And they were living in fear, wondering who could potentially be lurking out in the dark.
Yeah, I can't blame them.
And in many cases, they would ask for safety in numbers. Can you walk me to my car? They'd ask a male coworker. They would contact somebody from the security team. Can you take me to my car? And that's smart.
Yeah.
So in June of 1980, this is 6 months after Michelle was murdered, authorities released a composite sketch that was based on two witnesses who were questioned under hypnosis. The sketch depicted a man in his late teens to early 20s. He was about 6 feet tall. He had dark curly hair. In the beginning, tips started to come in as a result of the sketch, but it fizzled out and a $10,000 reward was offered for any information that could help lead to Michelle's arrest of her killer. So by 1986, 7 years now at this point after Michelle's death, the case really at this point, it was ice cold. Investigators had grown frustrated. Michelle's family, obviously more so. Investigators, They were looking into every single lead, but each and every lead had been exhausted. And her family was really starting to believe that they were at this dead end, and maybe her killer would never be brought to justice. Because again, we're talking about the 1970s. We don't have cameras. We don't have the DNA technology we have now. We don't have cell phone tracking. There's so much we don't have now.
It was a great time to be a killer.
Really. I mean, I know that sounds sick to say, but I mean, that's kind of true. So Albert Martinko, this is Michelle's dad, he went on to file a lawsuit against the mall. He was arguing that they failed to provide a reasonable security on the night that his daughter was killed. The case went as high as the Iowa Supreme Court, but on September 17th, 1986, the courts ruled in favor of Westdale Mall. Albert ended up passing away in 1995. Janet followed in 1998, and sadly, neither of the Martinko parents had any idea who was responsible for their daughter's death.
So they're both dead by 1988?
Yes. So at the time of their deaths, Andy Seidel had yet to voluntarily give his DNA sample, thus clearing him for the case. So odds are they both went to their graves believing that Andy was their daughter's killer and that he was just living his best life out in the world free. So obviously Janelle and John, they are now aware, this is Michelle's sister and brother-in-law, that Andy was not responsible for Michelle's murder. And they, feel sorrow about this, that he was a victim as well. And that many, many, many people pointed their finger at him over the course of nearly 30 years. So, however, after the passage of over 2 decades, the case thankfully regained life. In 2005, a classmate of Michelle's, this is Detective Doug Larison, he was in charge of the case. And Larison and Michelle, they weren't very close in high school, but he did feel deeply affected by her murder.
Yeah, they went to the same high school. Yeah.
So just being a classmate and now a detective, he really felt a responsibility that for once and for all, he wanted to solve this case.
Awesome.
And by this point, 26 years had passed in DNA technology. It had come a long way since 1979. So as Larison perused Michelle's case file, he realized that years earlier, another detective had sent blood scrapings from the gear shift of the Buick out for testing, but no one had even followed up on the results of it. So it was at this point in time that he realized that, oh gosh, they have useful DNA that we can work with. So Larison came across a lab report that proved that not only did they have the DNA, it was specifically from a male. So now we know for sure it was a man. They kind of made that assumption based on the violence in the case, because oftentimes women aren't necessarily involved in that crime.
Everybody listening to this assumed it was a man.
Right. So it's likely that her killer cut himself during the frenzied attack. The knife probably slipped because there was so much blood in the car, and then it pierced his gloved-clad hand. So despite the fact that he climbed in that car with gloves on, he managed to leave his DNA behind. Not his fingerprints, but his blood. So they also had DNA from the black dress that Michelle was wearing. And when the dress was sent to the lab for testing, a spot of blood on the dress had a full male DNA profile. It was consistent with the DNA that was found on the gear shift. So whoever cut themselves and left the blood behind on the gear shift also transferred their blood to Michelle's dress that she was wearing that night.
Okay.
So at this point in time, detectives had all the necessary lab work. They just needed the suspect, who was a match.
Yeah.
So obviously the sample had been uploaded into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. This is the national DNA database. But sadly, there was no matches. So whoever this DNA belonged to was not an offender. They were not in the system. So the years just continued to tick by. And Cedar Rapids police officers had obtained DNA samples from over 100 different people in the area as well, none of which were a match. So in November of 2013, Robert Riley, he was a Kennedy High School alumni. He remained in Cedar Rapids and he went on to create a Facebook group. He named it Michelle Martinko Cold Case 1979. And it was basically a gathering spot for people to kind of give input, discuss the case, talk about who Michelle was as a human being.
Yeah.
The group discussed evidence in the case. They proposed their own theories of who the killer could potentially be. And according to Riley, the police have indicated that the Facebook group, was really one of their best sources of active leads. People were just trying to help in any way that they could. So in the meantime, as the time just continued to pass, Detective Larison, he was just really, really getting run down by the case and worn down. And I actually give him a lot of props for this. But he approached his supervisors, and this included Matt Denlinger, and brought him in as a replacement. And, again, I say I give props because sometimes you do. You get fatigued by looking at the same information over and over and over. And he was big enough to say, I would like a fresh set of eyes, that aren't beaten down by looking at the same information.
Yeah. Then as a human, you just start to see the same thing.
Right. So he brought in Matt Denlinger, and Denlinger's own father had been one of the first officers to respond to the scene of Michelle's murder. So it's like full circle had come around.
Kind of cool.
So now the young Denlinger was officially on the case. He was serving as a lead detective in 2015. This is 36 years after Michelle's murder.
Let me crack something my old man couldn't because he didn't have the technology.
I mean, how ironic is that?
Yeah.
So Denlinger focused on the DNA sample, as by this point, technology had obviously only continued to progress, and he decided to reach out to Virginia's Parabon Nanolabs to see if they could give him more information. Maybe the perpetrator's eye color, hair color, or race, because if you've ever participated in like a DNA sample to get your genealogy, they will give you, clues as to what you look like, what your tastes are, if you taste sour a certain way, or it's actually really interesting and kind of spot on because we did it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like you're more apt to be a night person versus a day person, et cetera, et cetera. Super, super interesting.
Traits,
exactly. So that's kind of what this company is doing. So he was told by the lab that they could create a picture of their potential suspect from the DNA sample. So when the results came back, Denlinger was really impressed, and the image was striking. It put a face to the person who had potentially done this.
So it wasn't just like a word they were using, like they actually made a picture.
They made a picture.
Wow.
Yes. Okay. And he learned with this information that the suspect was likely a white male who had blonde hair and blue eyes. So with this new information, a press conference was held and various images were released to the public. Since investigators, they had no idea how old this person who attacked and killed Michelle was. He could have been 15, he could have been 40. Yeah. So how old was he in 1979 versus how old is he now?
Yeah.
So they're basically doing a lot of different photos with age progressions, how he could have potentially styled his hair. So they're doing different hairstyles and different ages, and they're releasing this to the public of what this person could have looked like in both 1979 as well as 2017. So despite the passage of so much time since Michelle had been killed, residents of Cedar Rapids were determined to help get justice in Michelle's case. Because everyone talked about Michelle's case. It spilled through generations. So everyone was aware of the case and wanted to find justice for this innocent teenage girl, despite the fact that so many years had gone by. So as the images were released, the tip line began to flood in with hundreds of phone calls. Because of the sheer volume, Denlinger admits, though, it was difficult. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, where do I even start with this?
Yeah.
So in the meantime, we are now moving into 2018 and a huge case is cracked. This is the year that the infamous Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, was finally arrested and charged with a terrifying spree of rapes and murders that occurred across California in the 1970s and 1980s. This is actually a case that I have read many a books on because it's just so unbelievably, horrifyingly scary. And the fact that this guy ran free for so many years. So they actually pinpointed him with the use of genetic genealogy. The case was massive news, massive, as residents of California, they lived in terror. Like during his spree of crimes, couples in the area where, he was attacking, some of them were not sleeping. They were sleeping in shifts. The wife would stay up and the husband would stand guard, or, vice versa. Yeah. So it was like truly unbelievable when this happened. And somehow this guy slipped through the fingers of police. He was nearly caught so many different times, but each and every time he got through. And by the time D'Angelo was arrested in 2018, he was 74 years old. Man. The man is responsible for at least 13 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries across California between 1974 and 1986.
Okay, what does that have to do with Michelle?
Well, as soon as Denlinger heard of the news of his arrest, his mind immediately had a light bulb go off over it. Yes, we have this DNA. We know it belongs to a male. There is not a match in CODIS, just like there was not a match for D'Angelo in CODIS. It was the use of genetic genealogy that led to his capture. So this is the charting of DNA from one family member to another. So with this, Parabon was ready to test the DNA sample yet again. So Parabon searched a public national database called GED Match, and this contains individuals who voluntarily submit their own DNA just to put together their family tree, just like Mike and I did. We did what was it, Ancestry?
Yep, and found a couple cousins and stuff like that
Right.
I've never heard of that I won't reach out to, but like second or third cousins, so I imagine they'd want to do the same thing with this guy.
Yes, exactly that. So now they can't find him in the CODIS database. Let's see if we can find a family member that just, voluntarily submitted their DNA. So in July of 2018, a report came back indicating that the DNA sample was a match to a relative of the killer.
And what kind of relative?
So it brought them to a woman who was living in Vancouver, Washington. This is Brandy Jennings. She was an office manager, a single mom, as well as the second cousin once removed from the murderer.
All right. So the kid of his second cousin, basically.
Yeah, those things muddle my brain, so I'll let you do the logistics there. So with Denlinger's focus on Brandy, he spent the next several months building her family tree all the way up to her great-grandparents with the help of genealogical records, birth records, gravestone records, basically anything they could get their hands on the internet.
Well, that's not even that close because with Ancestry, I was notified of a second cousin that I've never heard of. I've never heard of this last name, and I'm not even reach out to them because they don't care. I don't care either, whatever. It's so they still have a lot of work to do.
They do. So as more of her blood relatives came forward and provided their DNA, they basically started to get the pieces of the puzzle to fall together.
Super cool.
So as they continued to progress, Denlinger reached back out to Parabon, who recalibrated things. And with this, they indicated that their best odds were 3 brothers who live in Iowa. Wow. Right back to where Michelle was murdered, only 20 minutes away. So by October of 2018, the family tree that Detective Matt Denlinger had painstakingly put together was finally narrowed down to 3.
3 dudes.
And this is 3 brothers. This is Donald, Kenneth, and Jerry Burns. Investigators came up with a plan because obviously they know that they need to personally collect their DNA samples without their knowledge to see if they're a match. So they basically start trailing one brother to the next.
Wait for him to drink out of a cup or eat a burger or whatever.
So one brother headed to lunch. They confiscated the straw that he drank from. They took the second brother's toothbrush from his garbage.
That's awesome.
And the third brother was followed to a pizza restaurant. They watched as he drank 2 cups of soda from a glass with a straw, and then they confiscated that.
Awesome.
So the 3 samples were sent to the lab. One was an exact match.
Boom. Which one?
It was the DNA from Jerry Burns, the third brother who investigators had tailed to the pizza restaurant.
Holy crap.
As Denlinger looked at the sketch that was created from the DNA sample that Parabon had put together, he's looking at a younger Jerry Burns because obviously so many years had passed, almost 40 years by this point. So he saw that the images were very similar to one another.
Wow.
So now that investigators finally had their match, they began to try to find a connection. Who the hell is Jerry Burns and how did he come upon Michelle?
Yeah.
So they also looked into his past. They found that he was the exact opposite of who they would have expected to be a cold-blooded killer. He had a clean record. He was a respected businessman. And of course he had a clean record. His DNA was not in the CODA system.
Right.
He had a wife. He had 3 kids. He lived a quiet life in the town of Manchester, which was an hour north of Cedar Rapids. He owned Advanced Coating Concepts. This is a powder coating business. At the time of Michelle's murder, he would have been 25 years old. And that one sketch that the hypnosis, generated, they did say early 20s, but I don't think that, I think they said like dark curly hair, correct?
Yeah.
So on December 19th, 2018, this was exactly 39 years to the day that Michelle had been brutally murdered. It was a day that Denlinger specifically chose to interview Burns at his business in Manchester, Iowa.
Kind of giving him a heads up, like, hey, I'm going to interview you on this day, just in case it means anything to you.
Very significant day. And it was basically his goal as he walked into his business to rattle him to the core and obviously hope to get a confession.
Holy cow. How much like adrenaline's pumping through you like the night before that interview? You're like, all right, I got to get this guy. I can't screw it up. I can't say the wrong things. I'm going to nail him and I want to bring him in.
And again, full circle, because it was Matt's dad who had responded to the mall on the morning that Michelle's car was found and her body was found.
Crazy.
So Detective Matt Denlinger sits down and says, hey, how are you today? Jerry, my name's Matt with the Cedar Rapids Police Department. And I'm sure old Jerry's stomach sank at this point because almost 40 years had gone by. I'm sure this man thought he was free and clear.
Yeah.
So as the conversation began, Denlinger used a hidden camera. He had placed it inside his coffee mug and kept his fingers crossed that he could get a confession. So Denlinger says, the reality is we have your DNA from a crime scene and we know you were there that night this happened. How would we get your DNA at the crime scene there, Jerry? And Jerry acknowledged that he had been to that particular mall with his family in the past. He couldn't remember when. We're talking 39 years to the day. I don't know what I ate for dinner 2 weeks ago. What did I do 39 years ago? I have no clue. So when Denlinger asked him what happened on that specific night, the night of December 19th, 1979, Burns said he had absolutely no idea. Throughout the interview that lasted over an hour, Burns continued to accept work-related phone calls as well as text messages. He showed no emotion, and he maintained that he had no recollection of committing the crime.
I mean, it's definitely useful to say that because it was 39 years ago.
Like, you don't savagely stab someone 29 times in a mall parking lot and fail to recall.
Right.
So despite his denial, he's saying he has nothing to do with it. The DNA evidence was enough and they were able to make an arrest for the murder of Michelle Martinko. On the car ride back to Cedar Rapids, a camera was rolling inside the police car where Denlinger felt that Burns, was starting to chat and maybe reveal something of significance. So Denlinger had asked him if he thought it was possible, if maybe, just maybe, he had been the one to murder Michelle and he just doesn't remember. So Burns said, I believe that it could absolutely be possible to block things from your memories. So the fact that Burns did not give any plausible explanation as to why his DNA was inside Michelle's car, obviously, we have the DNA, but it's only solidifying to Matt that this is the guy. So, I mean, imagine if you have zero to do with a murder and you're not blocking it from your memory, you simply didn't do it, and someone 39 years later is coming in and saying, we have your DNA in this car. You'd be like, what?
Right.
Like, I don't think that was Jerry's reaction. Jerry was very calm.
Yeah.
He's like, I've been to that mall, but I mean, I'd be like astounded.
Almost like he was prepared if this day ever comes.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to act.
Exactly. So Michelle's sister Janelle and her husband John, they were elated when they heard the news because, again, almost 40 years had gone by. And at this point in time, they were truly with the belief that they were never going to solve this case and get justice for Michelle. So on the other side of the coin, now the Burns family is learning that their father, their husband, their uncle, et cetera, has been arrested for a murder.
4 years ago.
They're stunned because they're like, there's no way he's capable of murder.
Right.
So according to Jennifer and Donald Burns, their, father, he had always been there for them. He was a loving guy. they're like, there's no way my dad could have done this.
It's like one of our dads being like convicted of murder.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. So a CRPD investigator was tasked with combing through Burns's computers, and on his business computers, it was a little weird. There were, searches about blonde females, assault, rape, strangulation, murder, rape of a deceased individual, and cannibalism.
Wow.
I don't think if you look through my dad's computer, you're going to find those searches.
Hope not.
So it sounds like Jerry had a dark side to him that nobody was aware of, including his own family. And it just, once again, people are able to hide their true selves, and that scares the crap out of me. So Leon Spies served as Burns' defense attorney. He argued the fact that there was zero connection between Jerry and Michelle. He also referred to his client's recorded interview with Denlinger and the fact that he did not, flat out dispute how his DNA could have possibly been inside Michelle's car. You would expect that. If you were innocent, you would expect that. But he just said, you can never anticipate how a person is going to react when they're caught out of the blue like that. So that's his reaction to that. So after more than 4 decades had gone by since Michelle was murdered, her accused killer went to trial in February of 2020, and he pleaded not guilty. The trial was held in Davenport, Iowa, which was an hour away from Cedar Rapids, because the case had received so much media attention. So prosecutor Nick Banks, he knew that there were generations of people who lived in the area that knew of Michelle's story, and this gave him the sense of responsibility that he needed to do both Michelle, her family, and the town justice. So several of Michelle's friends, as well as ex-boyfriends and former suspect, even Andy Seidel himself, they were called in to testify. Andy indicated that he and Michelle were on good terms when they last interacted. He explained that they just simply grew apart. And, as they moved toward adulthood, there was really no reason to part ways in a negative way. Mike Wyrick, this was also, he was a suspect as well, Michelle's boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, I should say. He had a very hard time with his testimony. Basically, it brought every painful memory back up to the surface. So despite the fact that they had solid DNA evidence in this case, the prosecution still had a difficult task. They needed to tell a 40-year-old story that a suspect who had absolutely no criminal record, no connection to Michelle, was, capable of this heinous, I always want to say heinous personal crime. Because again, when investigators came upon Michelle brutalized inside her car, they believed it was personal. They believed it was a crime of passion. And with that comes a relationship, somebody that knew Michelle. There's not a single tie to Michelle and 25-year-old Jerry at that point in time.
That's the worst part of this whole story. There's no reason for them to know each other.
Exactly.
And
there is
so random. Was it 100% random? That just doesn't
zero
even make
connection.
sense. It doesn't make any sense.
So again, Jerry would have come to the mall prepared. He was wearing gloves. It's not that he was walking through the parking lot and just happened upon Michelle. He was wearing gloves when he approached that car. So yes, his DNA was there. There is no denying that. But again, there's no connection between Jerry and Michelle.
You'd love to have that.
Both Jennifer Burns, this is Jerry's daughter, and Don Burns, Jerry's brother, say that they feel that this is downright impossible. They mention the fact that they could not remember what they did last week, let alone how Jerry could say exactly what he was doing on the night of December 19th, 1979.
Sure, but it doesn't matter if you remember or not, your DNA's there.
Yes.
So, as long as you trust the DNA, if that is absolutely 100% true, then he definitely killed her. There's no way his blood would be on the gear shift and her dress.
Right.
You could say, okay, maybe I got a cut and she walked by me at some point. We didn't even know each other. Yeah, whatever. But on the gear shift, that's damning.
So that's just the point. It's on her person and on her car.
Yeah.
2 places.
Right.
So prosecutor Maybanks knew that science does not lie. That's why I love science, because I like facts. I like cold, hard facts. That's why I get mad when I watch Unsolved mysteries. I like answers. I like science. I like proof. So he is saying science does not lie because he knows that is what he has to hone in on in this case. and that there was a 1 in 100 billion chance that the DNA that was found, was not somebody else's. Since there are only 8 or so billion people in the world, the case hinged on this critical piece of evidence.
Right. That's what I said. As long as this is factual, then he's guilty, and that's just all there is.
So as the state's case was coming to an end, Maybanks called in a new witness. This is Michael Allison. How about that? You're Michael and I'm Allison. Yeah. So Allison is a drug offender who had gotten friendly with Jerry during their time behind bars. Allison straight up asked Jerry one night, "Did you do the crime?" And Jerry responded, "I can't talk about this." According to Allison, he went on to say that regardless of the verdict, he wins in this case because he was allowed the chance to live over the past 40 years. He was able to get married. He was able to have children. So as Jerry and Allison were playing cards together one evening, he said something disturbing that pushed Allison to testify. He flippantly said to Allison that if he continued to beat him at pinochle, he was going to have to take him to the mall. It's like, not funny.
Right.
So the defense called only one witness, and this is molecular biologist Dr. Michael Spence, who indicated that yes, there was no doubt that the DNA in Michelle's car belonged to Jerry. Nobody could argue that fact. But maybe it got there in an innocent way. So he went on to discuss transfer DNA and how each and every time we touch something, we're out at a store, we grab the doorknob, we shed DNA. We leave a biological trail of ourselves behind.
Yeah, but was this blood DNA or was this transfer DNA, or is there no way of knowing?
I mean, they took scrapings from the gear shift. There was definitely blood in that car.
Right.
Michelle had gone to the food court in the mall. She sat down with a friend, and this was a place that Jerry admitted, yes, I had taken my family to this mall. We had gone to the food court. Was it on this particular night? I have no freaking clue because it was 39 years ago. So basically, the defense is trying to bring in the idea that maybe it's as simple as Jerry leaving transfer DNA behind on a table, and then Michelle goes to sit down at that same table and gets Jerry's DNA on her dress.
Like, all they need to show is reasonable doubt.
Yes, that is the whole idea behind this entire story. So this still didn't answer the question, though. How did Jerry's DNA get onto the gear shift in Michelle's car?
Exactly.
Don Burns feels it's simple. It's an innocent answer. Jerry used to work at a dealership that sold Buicks. However, Jerry's DNA was also found on Michelle's black dress. What are the odds that Jerry had something to do with the dealership and the Buick that Michelle's family's car drove? And then Michelle also sat down at a table in the food court and transferred Jerry's DNA onto her dress.
I don't know. Probably better than a random murder case. I would maybe, right?
Not to me. No. If I was in the jury, I would say, hell to the no, Jerry. Nice freaking try.
Yeah.
So this still didn't answer the question. How did okay, excuse me, I already said that. So basically they're saying, how is it on the gear shift? Okay, well, maybe he made the car and it was just simply that innocent. Is it that innocent? That's what you have to believe as you're sitting in the jury box. Is this science and that this is fact? It's on the dress, it's on the gear shift, he did it? Or is it that he lived in the Cedar Rapids area? He worked on this car, potentially. He potentially transferred it to Michelle that way. That's what you have to decide while you're making your deliberations.
There's two things. Do you believe the science? And then also, was it just innocent or was it the murder?
Right.
So there's like three things.
So as the case came to an end and defense attorney Leon Spies gave his closing arguments, he told the jury how unlikely it is that a man such as Jerry, who went on to have kids and get married and live a clean lifestyle, could possibly have committed a crime like this.
Then you got the evidence of him researching cannibalism and rape and all that stuff. And it's like, do people, Google things out of curiosity? Yeah, but I've Googled cannibalism at some point, like, not me wanting to eat somebody, but those things would have to be entered into court. Like, I don't know, like just curiosities. Like you can't Google anything now because you're like, oh man, I'm going to be in a database.
Well, I Google a lot of disturbing things, but we also run a true crime podcast.
Sure, you have that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I would say. So his defense attorney, Leon Spies, is making a statement, and he says the state's scenario here is that Jerry Burns, a married man with 2 young children at home, leaves. He drives to Cedar Rapids, Iowa in the night, leaving his wife and children behind. Armed with a knife, armed with rubber gloves, he gets to Westdale Mall on the chance that he's going to encounter Michelle Martinko. Okay, but I'm stepping in and saying this. It is not Michelle he's intending. It's a victim he's intending. He just sees Michelle and takes his opportunity. He didn't set out for Michelle. He set out for a girl.
The lawyer is making it seem like that was supposed to be his target. Like,
right.
Because it's, you wouldn't think that would be his target.
No,
right?
not at all.
Because there's no connection.
No, there's no connection. So Leanna's saying, with the chance he's going to encounter Michelle Martinko, he decides to kill her. And then he leaves and drives back home, splattered with blood, presumably with a knife wound on his hand, because obviously we believe he was cut during the struggle and he left his blood DNA behind.
And real quick, this kind of guy, you would have to think has murdered other people.
Right.
You would have to think. So, please, please be another murder that pops up with his DNA. If you find that, I think you got him. But it's this one's still tough.
So, Leanna's basically concluding his statement by saying, that is the scenario that the government wants you to believe. So meanwhile, prosecutor Nick Maybanks told the jury that there is zero chance of an outside contamination on the dress. And he said, we know what happened and we know who did it. So they're leaving the jury to now go off and deliberate and decide, is it coincidental? Is it innocent? Or is it murder? So if you were sitting in the jury, we already know my opinion. I'd say guilty as hell. Yeah. What would be your verdict based on what I've told you?
I mean, I'd probably sit in there and be like, if the rest of the room was going guilty, I could probably go with them. But I was like...
well, you're not a sheep. You have your own thoughts.
No, I am. But if at the same time, I'm like... a reasonable doubt, right? So there's just absolutely nothing. There's more than nothing. So he did have those Google things.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about it. So the Google things are troubling, and the DNA, I definitely believe in DNA technology and all that for sure. I know it's his DNA. I would like to hear more about whether it's blood DNA or transfer. I'd like to hear their argument against that. I would say, I wouldn't be very strong in this, but I'd be like, my initial writing down on a paper would be guilty.
Okay. So they deliberated for 3 hours and the jury came back with a verdict, and Jerry Lynn Burns was found guilty of first-degree murder. So Janelle, this is Michelle's sister, she was thrilled and she saw just how silent and stunned, the other side of the courtroom was, as Jerry's family is listening to this. And again, he has adult children at this point in time and they cannot pinpoint, they can't connect the person they were raised by with the person being convicted.
Well, it's basically your whole life was
Yes,
a lie.
a lie.
Almost. Even though everything happened and he probably was a decent dad, but it's at the same time, you're like, he was a murderer the whole time?
Yes. So Matt Denlinger's father, this is Harvey, he was so proud that this case had gone, like I said, full circle. It began with him, it ended with his son.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
The residents of Cedar Rapids were so thankful to finally have justice in this case that spanned 4 decades. But they asked themselves the question, was Michelle Jerry Burns' only victim? Yeah. Just like you asked that question.
No way. No, if he killed her, then there's no way that was the only victim. Especially somebody like that. All these cases, they get sicker and sicker and they keep on wanting more and to get off on some other thing always.
It's never enough. So during his interview with Denlinger, Burns randomly mentioned a name and he tossed out the name Jody Heinstruth. And this
randomly?
Yes. A blonde anchor woman who was kidnapped near her car in a parking lot in 1995. And she was never, ever found. Her body has never been located.
Okay.
Jody worked in Mason City, Iowa, 2 hours from where Burns lived. There is no evidence that he knew her, but there is no evidence or connection between Burns and Michelle. So he might be the type of guy that jumps in his car, takes a drive an hour or two away as to sever ties and connect him to a case, and just goes out hunting for a victim. So there wouldn't be a connection. If you're hunting for random victims, there is no connection. I mean, you're driving hours away, there is no connection.
And literally hunting like an animal.
Yes.
And that is unfortunately the unquote unquote smartest way to do it. Because you don't want a connection there, because then it's less likely that police are going to find you.
Yes. And there are people who do this. I think of Israel Keys. He's a serial killer and he would pre-fly out and drive. So he wouldn't have a connection to that place. So say he'd fly into one city, drive 100 miles and actually bury a kill kit so that when he did go back to that location, there'd be no tie to him there.
Did you do that story? I remember
didn't.
that.
I didn't because there's so many podcasts.
I think
I've
looked into it. I've looked into it.
You know, I've listened to probably a handful of podcasts on that case. I try to do ones that are less known. If I know it very well, I oftentimes won't cover the case. But you know, people do random killings. We're dealing with a monster in this case. We're not dealing with somebody that has a sane mind.
Right.
So Matt Denlinger, his gut tells him that absolutely there are other victims out there that are a result of Jerry Burns.
And not like a small amount. I would say there are dozens, you know, potentially many dozens.
Right. But I guess would we then expect the DNAs to start pinging in with the CODIS system?
If they find them, but they wouldn't. So like this guy's
that's
pretty,
the thing.
he's thought out. Like
Yes.
he's kind of smart at this.
He did leave Michelle's body right there in full view in her car. But
that might have been his first.
Yeah, exactly. That's true because we're talking about 1995 with this anchor woman.
And he's probably sitting there like, I shouldn't have left the body. Next one's
you
gonna
learn
go
from your
somewhere else.
mistakes.
Yeah.
So again, like with this person that Matt believes, Jody, that Jerry is responsible for Jody's murder. They have never found Jody's body, thus the evidence to connect him to the crime. So it could be as simple as that.
And that's probably his proudest because it was a news anchor or something, you know?
So because Michelle Martinko fought her attacker with such intensity, she caused Jerry Burns to cut himself, leaving his DNA on both the gear shift as well as her black dress.
If you're going down, go down swinging, man. Just get any kind of blood and DNA you can. It's like that's the last horrible thoughts in your head, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And, you know, despite the fact that this monster wore gloves as he climbed into her car, she was able to get him to leave his DNA behind, thus solving her crime. Despite, again, 4 decades of passing. So 4 decades after her young life ended far too soon, her family celebrated her memory, and rather than focusing on her death, they focused on her life. And yes, it was short, but it was her life. And Jerry Burns was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He continues to maintain that he had nothing to do with Michelle's murder. Before his arrest, Jerry Burns was free for decades. He lived his life. He did all of the things that 18-year-old Michelle Martinko was robbed of, finishing her education, starting her career, marriage, having a family of her own, if that's what she chose to do. Her life was just starting out when it tragically ended. Michelle's case touched so many people over so many years, and it was a tremendous relief that her killer was finally brought to justice. And that is the murder of Michelle Martinko. Just another one of these cases from the 1970s that are finally being solved thanks to the advancement of DNA technology.
It's pretty incredible. It's really awesome to see something like that happen. I mean, horrible for the whole incident, but obviously to catch them.
Right. And the fact, you know, I feel remorse that this mother effer lived for 39 years
making
doing
it seem
his
like
thing.
He's a regular dude.
Yep, owning his business, being the affable Jerry that everyone knew and trusted and loved. And like we said, who knows how many other victims he could be potentially responsible for.
Did his kids ever like come to terms and be like, my father's a murderer?
Not that I saw, but you got to wonder in the darkness of night what goes on in their heads. And I feel sorry for them.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, because I can't imagine what it must feel like to have your world tipped upside down and learn that the man that raised you and you trusted and loved could be responsible for doing such a thing.
And in our last episode, we talked about genetics, and you got to wonder if like one of the kids has like these demons inside of them. And it's like, oh, well, I guess that explains why I have these like weird thoughts sometimes about murder or whatever. You know, it's like, hopefully you don't act on them because your father was a serial killer, potentially, allegedly.
Potentially. You know, we don't know that.
Right. But it's scary. So,
but there's just more and more cases that we keep telling and hearing about and solving. Oftentimes the killer has already died, but at least the family can finally put a face to what horrible thing happened to their loved one.
Yeah. Thanks for telling Michelle's story. They're all very important and horrible stories. So thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it again. And if you like what you hear here, then go ahead and become a subscriber. You got some extra scratch. Go over to Patreon or over to Apple subscriptions. You can listen to tons of bonus episodes. They're there for you. You can become a free Apple subscriber for like 3 days and listen to as many as you can. I think the record so far is like 20. So if you can beat that, let us know.
20
episodes listened to in the free trial.
Oh, wow.
I'm just guessing.
Okay, I was going to say, I feel sorry for you if you listen to my voice for that many episodes in a row. Wow.
Yeah, it's horrible. Trust me.
People will make comments like, oh, Allison's accent. It's like, oh, no, this isn't a Chicago accent. It's
a little bit. You got a little Chicago accent.
Yeah, our daughter makes fun because I say salads.
Give me a salad.
Allison.
Allison.
What's your name? Allison.
So thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to get you another year. We got a couple more episodes before the end of the year. But yeah, if you like what you hear, then we're going to keep on doing this thing, keep this train going.
Yeah, and we appreciate you guys being here. We know, like I said, the holidays are a crazy time of year. And as I said in our previous bonus episode, we just hope that you're taking good care of yourself. It's hectic, but give yourself a little downtime as well. Work that in.
You come first.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you fall apart, everything else falls apart.
Yep.
Like we always say here, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Yep.
So thank you guys so much for being here. We will be back for a regularly scheduled episode next week. And until next time.